We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Glory UGA podcast, where today I'm going to explain why I think that Gunnar Stockton is the right quarterback for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2025. But before we get there, let's just quickly go ahead and get this out of the way. If you're a diehard Georgia fan and you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to this channel right now, because all the content we produce for you here and on the audio side of things is designed for you guys. That's why we've been doing this for the last 10 years, so you don't want to miss any of our content. While you're at it, like, comment, let me know what you guys think. And of course, check out the Glory UGA podcast, the audio side of things, wherever you get your podcast, for a whole lot more coverage of Georgia football, and not really all Georgia sports, but certainly Georgia football. So check all that stuff out, guys. But let's go ahead and get into today's show. And look, I'm going to go ahead and just address this right off the bat. I know I've been running this podcast for 10 years. I've been talking about Gunnar Stockton for a while. I know that there are people on two different sides of Gunnar. There's the Gunnar stands who think the guy can do no wrong. He's a high school legend. This guy's going to be the best quarterback in Georgia history. On the other side, you have the exact opposite of that, right? You have the Gunnar doubters. I don't want to say Gunnar haters. I don't know if that's the right word, but certainly the Gunnar doubters. So I know that there's a segment of the fan base, and you might be part of that segment, that is just on principle alone going to downvote this video because I'm saying something remotely positive about Gunnar Stockton. I know that's going to happen, but all I would say is, before you flame away, at least just hear me out, hear what I have to say, and then do whatever you want, react accordingly. That's all good. But what I want to make sure that I say here at the outset is I want to make sure everyone understands what I'm saying about Gunnar Stockton. I don't want words to be put into my mouth here. I don't want there to be any kind of misunderstanding. I am not saying in any way, shape, or form that I think Gunnar Stockton is the best quarterback in America. I'm not saying that Gunnar Stockton is the most talented quarterback in America. I'm not even saying Gunnar Stockton is going to be all SEC or even the most talented quarterback on our roster. I'm not saying any of those things. But that doesn't mean that Gunnar Stockton still isn't the right quarterback for this 2025 Georgia football team. And I go back just a couple of years to Stetson Bennett. I think, especially 2021, guys, and to a lesser degree 2022. Was Stetson Bennett the best quarterback in the country in either of those seasons? Of course not. Caleb Williams is out there. Jaden Daniels is out there. Right? I mean, CJ Stroud was out there. He wasn't physically better than those guys. I think Stetson was far better than people gave him credit for it, and I think we started to all see that in 2022. But he wasn't the best quarterback. He certainly wasn't the most talented quarterback, more talented than people gave him credit for. Yes, but not the most talented guy. But in that moment, 2021, 2022, Stetson was 1,000% the right quarterback for Georgia. So I don't think that you have to be the best quarterback to be the right guy for a specific team. So let's talk about Gunnar. Let's get to Gunnar Stockton himself. And I want to start with this too. Those of you who've been following my podcast, following us for a long time here at the Glory UGA podcast, especially the past year or so, when Gunnar's kind of moved up the depth chart to number 2 quarterback last year, you know very well that I have, let's say, a complicated relationship with Gunnar Stockton. Maybe a conflicted relationship is a better way to say that. And what I mean by that is I have mixed emotions. I have mixed feelings about Gunnar Stockton because, number one, I'll go ahead and admit it. I'm not going to try to hide this. I root for this guy. I want good things to happen for Gunnar Stockton. I've said that a million times. I don't hide that at all. I make no bones about that. This is a good dude, man. And I root for good things to happen to good people. That's just kind of a thing I do. I know not everyone operates that way, but I mean, guilty as charged. Yeah, if you're a good guy, I want to see good things happen to you. And Gunnar's a good guy. Yeah, he is. So I root for the guy. I want him to have all the success in the world. But saying that, as much as I like Gunnar and like the guy that he is and think he's a good dude, ultimately what matters more for me is what's best for Georgia. Because at my core, I'm a Georgia guy. That's who I am, guys. I can't hide that. I'm a Georgia guy. All right, that's legit. That's just kind of what I am. So while I want Gunnar to have success, I care more about Georgia having success, if that makes sense. And those of you who've been around, I've had my doubts at times about Gunnar from a football standpoint. I go back to last fall camp. So I was able to go to a practice last fall camp, and I came back immediately, and I hopped on here, fired up the mic. I didn't even do a YouTube. We weren't really doing the YouTube stuff now. At that time, we kind of been doing that last 6-ish months or so. But I fired up the mic on the podcast, recorded an episode, and I was reacting to everything I saw at practice But I spent a good amount of time talking about Gunnar Stockton. And what I said at the time was, dude, I'm scared to death. Like Carson better not get hurt. Because if he does, I don't know, man. Because at the one practice I saw, and I did qualify it and say, hey, it's one practice. Like the guys have good practices, guys have bad practices. Like people are up and down. It happens. He's a young guy. He's growing. And I've heard good things about him from people I trust outside that one setting. But the one setting I saw him in last fall, like a couple of weeks before the season kicked off, I was concerned, man. The guy didn't look like he had a full grasp of what's going on, like the accuracy, like he was just like wildly overthrowing guys on the sideline. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, like, oh, this is our backup quarterback this year. I got doubts, man. I got doubts. And I shared those doubts. Like I made it very clear, like I was skeptical of what would happen if something happened to Carson Beck. So yeah, I've had those doubts from a football standpoint. And I said it many times, and I'll reiterate it here again. I think that Ryan, and make sure I get this name right. I know I pronounce this wrong. I want to say Puglisi, Pug, right? I always get his name wrong. My bad. But I still think that Pug has better physical tools. Puglisi, all right? There we go. I think I got it right that time. I think he has better physical tools. I've said that a million times. I'll say it again. Like, Pug's ceiling, I think, is higher than Gunnar Stockton's ceiling. But how close to that ceiling is Pug right now relative to Gunnar to his ceiling? I think that's a question you have to ask. So that's why my relationship with Gunnar, it's been complicated, man. It's like I want the guy to do well, but I've seen him in settings where it's like, man, I don't know. And I try to keep it real with you guys. Like, yeah, I'm a Georgia guy, but I pride myself on being an objective Georgia guy. If I don't think a guy's good enough or I think somebody's struggling, I'll tell you, right? Like, I don't think that Georgia's, like, we have the best player at every position. That's not how I look at things. And so I had questions about Gunnar Stockton. So there's that. But the thing about me is, and look, those of you who've been around the podcast for a while, you know this. I'm not a hardliner. And what I mean by that is I'm not a guy who like makes up my mind about a player or a coach and just digs in my heels and refuses to alter that opinion once I have made that judgment. When I get new information, and maybe I'm crazy, but when I get new information, I will adjust my opinion accordingly. And I have gotten new information with Gunnar Stockton. Like I have guys, and we'll talk about that here as we go through the episode, but I've gotten new information. And so my position on Gunnar, how I feel about Gunnar, this goes back to me being conflicted about him, has evolved. It has evolved over time. It's actually evolved quite a bit relatively recently. Like if you go over the past like 3 or 4 months, even like the past month or so, it has evolved even more. So let's go back to last year, right? So we know I got on here in the fall after that practice, like, hey man, I hope Carson Beck never gets hurt because dude, we're in bad shape. And then what happens in the SEC championship game right before halftime? Yeah, Carson Beck goes down. Guys, I'm not gonna lie to you. What I did in that stadium, I'm standing on the Sky Bridge with my wife and in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and I turned to her and I'm just like, I'm apoplectic, man. I'm like, we're done. Throw up my hands like, we're done. There's no way we're gonna win this game. No way we're gonna come back. And not only that, a guy was like freaking out because like, oh God, now that Gunnar's going to go in, if Carson's out for because at the time we didn't know exactly what was wrong with Carson, but I was, catastrophizing, thinking the worst. And so I'm like, oh my God, if Carson's hurt here and he's hurt for the playoffs, then Gunnar's going to play, and then that's going to damage our ability to go out and recruit a high-profile guy out of the transfer portal. Because I was of the opinion at the time that, hey, we need to be very active in the quarterback portal sweepstakes. Like, we need to be very, very active. And I had on pretty good authority that we were going to be. But when Carson went down, that changed everything. At the moment, I was like, this is going to change everything because nobody's going to, when Gunnar gets the experience the rest of this game and he gets the experience in the playoffs, depending on how far we go, and if he happens to perform like decently well, we're going to have a hard time selling one of these high-profile guys to come to Georgia because you're like, well, you got this guy. Like, he's now got some experience, and so I'm going to have to jump over him, and I don't know if, like, is that going to happen? Like, it would require a risk for some of these high-profile guys to come to Georgia when they go somewhere else and there not be the risk, where they kind of just like walk in to the starting job. So like at that time, like I'm freaking out, man, at halftime of the SEC championship game. But then Gunnar does come out, and at halftime I was still like crossing my fingers, like maybe Carson will come back, maybe Carson will come back. No, he didn't. And then Gunnar happens, man. Gunnar comes out there and just puts on a gritty performance, dude, and leads us back in the second half to overtake Texas and win the SEC championship. Now, and I felt better about Gunnar Stockton after that performance. I was still skeptical because I'm looking at it, guys, from an objective point of view. And while I was thrilled for Gunnar because I do love the kid, I want the good things to happen to him. I'm thrilled that we won the game. I'm trying to project forward to the playoffs. Like, can we win with this guy? And you look around and you say, okay, well, yeah, he did some really good things with his legs. He did some good things, on the run outside the pocket and made a nice throw to Lawson Lucky on the sideline there. But he also put the ball in harm's way a couple times, right? And almost threw a game-losing interception that could have been a pick six if the guy that was right there next to Jade Barron would have actually turned around and seen that. Who was it? Was it Lucky that made the play, I want to say? But it actually turned around trying to block somebody. That could have been a game-changing moment right there. So he wasn't perfect, and I see those things. Look, he did some really good things, but also, I don't know, man. The awareness, is it there? So I had questions. I felt better, but I was still skeptical. And then the Sugar Bowl comes, and now I'm in New Orleans. I'm sitting there watching Gunnar Stockton, and I was hopeful. I was very hopeful that we would spend that lead up, that month that we had in the lead up to the Sugar Bowl, actually installing an offense, or at least tweaking our offense to fit Gunnar's skill set better, because I was skeptical that we could just run the same offense that we ran with Carson Beck all year with Gunnar, given his skill set, and have enough success to beat Notre Dame. And so I was hopeful that we would kind of tweak things, and we'd use his legs a little bit more, and open up the ground game, and we'd be able to beat Notre Dame, right? Well, that didn't happen, right? We know we didn't beat Notre Dame. We didn't really do all that different from what we'd normally done. We threw a couple of new run plays in there, but we ran them a handful of times, like the first drive or two, and we kind of just were more or less running the same offense that we ran with Carson Beck. But in that Sugar Bowl, while it was in a losing effort, sure, Gunnar performed better than I expected him to in that game. So even though we lost, and that sucked, man. It was awful, obviously. Hate the season in like that. But I came away from that game very encouraged about Gunnar Stockton. Much more encouraged by him than I had been really, honestly, at any point in his career at Georgia at that point. I wasn't sold on him yet. I can't sit here and say, I was completely sold by that performance, but I was very encouraged. I saw him do some things well that I had questions about. I saw him throw the deep ball well. I saw him go through progressions well. I saw him diagnose defenses well. I saw him refrain from putting the ball in harm's way. I saw him do some good things out there. Now, there were some things he needed to clean up on. The release was oh my God, it's way too long. That's going to create issues for you. The pocket awareness wasn't really there. The move in the pocket, that was concerning for me. But I was hopeful, hey, maybe with enhanced reps next year and all through the offseason, he can clean up those things. The guy hadn't really played meaningful football in 3 years. So maybe that's just rust, right? So I'm hopeful, but still not fully sold. But after the coaches clinic last week, I know I did this video earlier in the week. If you haven't checked that out, go check that out. Got a lot of notes for you guys from various positions on the field. I did talk about Gunnar. I'm going to talk about a little more here, though. But after the coaches clinic last week, in combination with the interview that Gunnar did this week, and am I reading too much into that? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Whatever. But those two things in combination have now led me to believe that Gunnar Stockton is the guy that Georgia needs at quarterback in 2025. Again, hear me out here. So, number one, why is my thinking evolved to believing now that Gunnar Stockton is the guy Georgia needs at the quarterback position, the most important position on the field? Well, number one, you have to start here. I think the guy can play, all right? You have to start with the on-field ability. And that is where I've had some serious questions about Gunnar Stockton. I've had no questions about his leadership abilities and the intangibles. I've never had questions about that. I know how that guy is built. I know what he's made of, right? But on the field, from what the very limited sample size I had to work with, certainly before the Sugar Bowl last year, I had some serious questions. I was skeptical. I own that. I was. But now I have seen enough from the end of last year, certainly the Sugar Bowl, and now here over the past week or so that I think the guy can play. I think he can play. Do I think he's the best quarterback in the country? Again, no, I'm not saying that. But I think he's plenty good enough and plenty talented enough for Georgia to win football games, for Georgia to potentially go all the way. I think he's good enough with the talent we have around him. Now, what are some of the questions I had about him? As I mentioned, throwing motion. It was way too long. It was too slow. The release was too slow, right? What we saw last year. But I'm telling you, the guy has corrected that. He's clearly put in a lot of work in the offseason. It's a much more compact release right now. He's getting the ball out of his hands very quickly. You don't have the massive windup he had, especially on the deep balls, because that's when you're in the pocket, you're trying to wind up, throw a deep ball, somebody comes and swipes the ball away, and then you fumble and you lose the game, right? We've kind of already seen that. So that was a concern I had. But what I've seen, this he's cleaned that up. It's a different release right now. So if you've had that concern, I get it. I agree with you, but that's changed. Just wait till you see him on G-Day. You'll see that it has changed. The other big question I had was the awareness in the pocket movement, pocket mobility, all those things. That was maybe my biggest question with him after what we saw last year. Certainly with a sack fumble right before the half, and it wasn't all on him, but like, you got to feel that, and you got to get the ball away, you got to escape, you got to do something, right? You can't just stand there like a duck and like get murdered and fumble the ball, and then we lose the game, right? Well, again, I was hopeful that was just something that, was rust, because he hadn't played football really in a game in like 3 years, like a real game setting like that. And I can tell you, like, he certainly seems like he's improved in that regard. Now, you don't really know until the live bullets are flying. And by live bullets, I mean like in a game, because nobody's hit the quarterback in practice. Like that's a no-no. Kirby might, like, he punch you in the face, dude. They just straight up knock you out if you did that. Like, I don't know what the man would do. So there's still a question of sorts there, but I think that he's improving in that regard with those reps. So it does just like that. Maybe that was a little bit of rust. He's always been even at the end of last year, he showed the ability to be an accurate passer, certainly down the field, and you're seeing that as well right now. I think he throws a better deep ball than Carson Beck did, and I guess still does right now. And another part about this thing, okay, so why is he the right quarterback for Georgia? Yeah, I think he has the talent, as I laid out there, but I also look at the wide receivers that we have this year in this room, okay? The guys that I would project right now, based on what I have seen and what I've heard, to be the top guys for Georgia receiver would be Colby Young, who I think right now is the alpha right now, because he's not learning things. He knows the system now. I think that Noah Thomas is a stud in the making. I think the 6'6" frame, the catch radius, all that, really good athleticism in that frame. And Zachariah Branch in the slot. I think those are probably your three top guys. I think the freshmen, Wiley and Taylor. Taylor's, I think, is a little bit ahead right now because he's a little bit more polished in his game coming out of high school. Maybe not as physically gifted as Wiley, but just more polished, more like game ready right now. Of course, you're going to have Dylan Bell. Like, he's going to be a factor. I think Scovey White's going to be a factor. Nacho Tuggle, like, his status is up in the air. We'll see. But if you focus on the top guys, who I think will be the top guys, specifically with a guy like CJ or with Noah Thomas and Colby Young, what do those guys do best? Like, yeah, they're good athletes, but their number one quality is like their 50-50 catch ability, right? Like the contested catch ability, the catch radius, those things. They're the kind of guys that if you just throw a deep ball and you just get it in their vicinity, they're going to go up and they're going to make the play on the ball, and they're going to win the majority of those battles, right? So if you think about Gunnar Stockton, what does he throw best based on, again, I know it's a limited sample size, but what I have seen, he even said it himself in his interview this week, like they asked him, like, what's your favorite route? And he's like, go route, right? And you see that, man. He throws that route extraordinarily well. And when you have the type of receivers where size is their greatest attribute that we have on the outside, it just kind of meshes with Gunnar's his strength as a passer, which is throwing the ball down the field with accuracy. So I think that really matches with the type of wide receivers that we have. And then there's the Bobo factor. Look, I know a lot of you hate Mike Bobo, and there's nothing I can say that will ever change that, okay? So I'm not even going to try. I'm not even trying here, right? But clearly at this point, we're keeping Mike Bobo this year. That's happening. So if you are keeping Bobo, regardless of how you feel about that, you can rail against that all you want, but it's happening, right? He's staying this year at the very least. And if that's going to be the case, if we're keeping Mike Bobo around as offensive coordinator for another year, aren't we better off with a guy that has been in this system for going to his fourth year? And I would say as long as he's talented enough, like experience is great, but it doesn't matter if you don't have the talent, right? Like you're like a walk-on scrub. I know Stetson Bennett was a walk-on. He wasn't a scrub. But if you got like a walk-on with a noodle arm, like you don't have the talent. It's not going to work out, even if you've been in the system for 5 years. But Gunnar, as I laid out, I do think he has the talent. And if you have the coordinator back again, it just makes sense that your offense would be better off with the guy that's been in this system as long as he has and knows this system inside and out. There's no learning curve involved there. I know we don't open with a Clemson this year, guys, but week 3, we go to Tennessee. It gets real. It gets real quick, man. That's a tough place to play. It's a good football team, right? And if you're working in, even if it's a transfer guy who's still learning the system in week 3, like that's not a game you want to lose. You can't afford to lose that game. So I do think that his knowledge of the system, the continuity there between him and Bobo is a good thing. And another reason why I think he's the right quarterback for this Georgia football team. And look, guys, I firmly believe if you look at the talent based on what I have seen with this team, I know it's very early. I'm only seeing a little bit. I do want to see the actual full scrimmage out there at G-Day. But we have assembled a team with enough talent. And some of it's young, admittedly so. Yes, and it's not that we're without holes, but every position is, every team has holes now, guys. With transfer portal, like no team is out there like fully equipped and ready to go right now. But I think that we have assembled a team with a type of talent around him that is absolutely fully capable of winning it all. I believe that. And I know, like, you go out and bring a transfer quarterback. You go out and get, and I wanted John Mateer was the guy I wanted. I've been saying that since like last October. I mean, I watched Washington State. I was like, bro, this guy is legit. I've wanted a mobile quarterback, a dual threat guy for a long time. I still want one of those. And Gunner is more of a dual threat guy than Carson, but not like a truish dual threat. He's mobile enough, but he's not going to do like what Jalen Milroe does. Like, we all know that. But if you bring in a transfer quarterback, even if it's a highly talented guy, it's still a risk. It represents a risk because, like, again, you got to learn the system. And I mean, the Georgia system is not the easiest to run. It's a pro-ish style system, and that's a lot. So there's a certain risk. Now, could you have a situation where it's like Cam Ward comes in year one and lights it up? Yeah, of course you could. But there also be a situation where that doesn't happen, right? Like, it won't necessarily work out the way you want it to. And if you go to the redshirt freshman, who I do believe is extremely physically gifted in Pug, well, a redshirt freshman, as talented as he might be physically, that represents an even bigger risk, right? So again, it kind of makes sense if you're keeping an offensive coordinator, and one of the big reasons you want to keep him is for continuity's sake, so you keep the staff together. Because last year we had a lot of change, certainly on the offensive side of the ball with our coaching staff. And you want to keep that together. Well, it just makes sense to keep the quarterback with that group as well. So from the on the field standpoint, I do think there's a strong argument to be made that Gunner Stockton is the right quarterback for Georgia. And then there's the intangible side of things. And look, I know, guys, I know that a lot of you are like just going to laugh this off and think this is ridiculous and I'm making way too much of this. And maybe I am. All right, maybe I am. All right. But I think when you think about last year and why we were so up and down from game to game. And look, guys, I know we still won the SEC championship, and that was awesome. But you also know, man, it was a struggle in a way it hadn't been in a couple of years, man. Like, we were skating by teams. We had no business just skating by, like Kentucky. I know it was on the road. I know it was at night. I was there, guys. I know. But beating that team by 1 point, man, like, past couple Georgia teams, that ain't happening, right? And Mississippi State, the way they come back in the second half of that game. Georgia Tech, right? Like, you're up and down. You blow out Tennessee, and you come back and you play Georgia Tech, and you're about to lose that football game, right? So the up and down nature of last year's team, there's a number of reasons why that was the case. Number one, injuries were a major part of that. Like, you can't, it's not an excuse. That's just an explanation. Like, that was a big part of some of the issues that we had with consistency last year. You have to admit that. The schedule was also brutal. It's tough, man. It's tough to play the quality of teams that we were playing back to back to back like that, especially the back half of the season, and get up to play those teams when you're Georgia and they're all getting up to play you, right? It's tough, man. It's really, really tough, especially when you have all the injuries that you're dealing with. And then the portal, right? So you have these injuries, and the guys that you would normally rely on to be like the next man up, who typically in previous years would have been much more experienced, have been in the system for longer, and they're ready to go. You trust them more. Now you're throwing young guys. You're throwing freshmen in there, man. They might or might not be ready. We don't know, right? And so that creates some instability and some inconsistency. That's all part of it, certainly. But I think another big part of it is the connectedness, which is a term that Kirby likes to use. So I'm going to use that term. The connectedness of our team wasn't there last year the way it had been in the previous 2 or 3 years. I'm not saying that we weren't connected at all. I think we were probably more connected than most teams. That's why we were still able to overcome the adversity that we overcame and fight back in a lot of those games where we were down, right? But I don't think that we were as connected as we had been previously. And don't take my word for it, guys. I did a video last week where I talked about some of the interviews that some of these players had done, where there were some very, almost borderline alarming words that I actually kind of took solace in, because at least our guys are owning some of the issues that we had last year. Like Oscar Delp, for example, straight up said, my mind was on other things, man. I was worried about the NFL. I was thinking about my future beyond this. I wasn't locked in the way that I should have been locked in. So the players themselves are saying these things, not in private, not in skull sessions, out loud publicly, right? So don't take my word for it. It's pretty clear from the players' words themselves that they were not as connected as they were a year ago. And so if you think about, okay, well, why was that the case? Well, Kirby, at the top, you got to start there. He bears some culpability for that. But we also had a quarterback last year in Carson Beck that, look, I'm not trying to rip the guy. I'm not trying to kill him, all right? But let's just be objective about it. We had a quarterback last year that was, I think it's fair to say, a divisive figure within the fan base, because we talked about him all last year with the fan base, but I also think a divisive figure within the locker room as well. I cannot speak on that with as much authority as I can say the fan base, as I run a Georgia podcast. I live in Athens, and I hear from a lot of people. I don't speak for every Georgia fan, but I hear from a lot of people, right? And there was certainly a divide between the people who were out on Carson Beck, the people that still believed in Carson Beck. I myself went kind of back and forth on it. So I can speak with pretty good authority there. Inside the locker room, I don't have as much authority. I can tell you what I've heard and also what you see on the field, but it certainly seemed like there was a division of sorts within the locker room, and Carson Beck was a part of that. So we had a team that I think coming into last year, if you think about what happened in 2021 and 2022, back-to-back national titles, 2023, yeah, we fell short, but, we had this incredible winning streak, the longest winning streak in SEC history. Then you beat Florida State, you'd murder Florida State, right, the way that we did. And so I think that coming into 2024, we already had a team that was at serious risk of falling victim to what Kirby has called the entitlement disease, right? I think we already had a team that was at risk of that. Like when you have that much success year after year after year, and everyone's saying, well, George is the new standard in college football. George is the preseason number one. George is the betting favorite to win the national title. Like when you hear that over and over and over again, like Kirby Smart can say it all he wants. Guys, like you're a different team. You didn't earn any of that. That was other teams. He can say it all he wants, but the players are 18, 19, 20 years old, right? And it's just the social media era. They internalize all that stuff. And so, yeah, I think you were, coming in last year, we were more at risk of falling victim to that entitlement disease than maybe we had been in the previous years. And now, going into 2024, you have a quarterback who's driving flashy cars, who's flaunting all this massive NIL money, who's dating this like high-profile social media influencer, who's rather aloof from his teammates, not living with any guys on the team, is not really interacting with them much outside of the field. Again, I can't say that with a lot of authority. I can just say what I've heard, okay, on that. I can just tell you what I've heard from people I trust. But when you have that from the most important position on the field, it's far easier to allow that entitlement disease to seep into your team, okay? I think it's far easier. And look, we still had some really good leaders, guys like Jalen Walker, Tate Ratledge, who fought against that, man. They fought against that. But again, when you have the quarterback, who is the most high-profile guy on your team, everyone's kind of looking to him. He's supposed to be the leader, right? When you have a guy like that at quarterback, it still allowed the entitlement to seep enough into this team to make a difference. And in an era, I believe this, guys, and you might disagree with me, that's fine. But in this era we're in right now, this NIL transfer portal era, the Twin Towers, if you will, that has, at the very least, we can all agree that it's led to a wider distribution of talent, okay? Georgia and Alabama, teams like that used to be able to just have their roster stocked 2 deep, 3 deep with all these studs. Well, those guys largely aren't waiting around anymore. They're not waiting their turn. They're heading elsewhere. They're getting their payday, and they're starting right away, right? That's the name of the game now. So when you have that wider distribution of talent and you have more roster instability, I do believe that culture within your locker room, the connectedness within your locker room, I think that becomes more important than ever. I think that can be a separator. When all these different teams have talent now, and Georgia still has a talent edge, but maybe not as much of a talent edge as we once did, I truly do believe that the culture within your program and the way your guys work and the connectedness within the locker room, I believe that type of stuff can be a separator. I believe it was a separator back for us in 2021. Like Alabama was really talented. There were other really talented teams that in 2021 and 2022. But I believe that our culture was a big part of why we were able to win those national titles, was separating us from the other really, really, really talented teams in the country. And last year, I think it was pretty clear. We were not fully locked in on the field. And again, don't take my word for it. Oscar Delp himself talked about it last week, all right? We had some offensive linemen talking about it last week, okay? We weren't as fully locked in on the field. And also, I think that's because we were not as fully locked in on the practice field, in the meeting rooms, in the weight rooms, all those things. Like you don't just show up on game day if you haven't been locked in preparation for game day. You're not going to be locked in on game day. So it's all of that. And again, I believe the quarterback is a huge part, maybe the biggest part of setting that tone, especially in the offseason, but certainly in the actual season as well. And our quarterback last year, let's just be real, guys, he went Hollywood. Carson Beck went Hollywood, right? And that was the tone that we set from the most important position on the field. So how do you fix that? How do you get back to having the type of culture and connectedness that allowed us to go on that insane, like historic run that we went on in the SEC from 2021 through 2023? Well, yeah, at the very, very top, like the head man's job, like it's got to be a renewed emphasis by Kirby and his staff, for sure. Like I know they've been fighting this for a long time, but you got to find different ways to fight it. If the message is not resonating the way that it once did, you got to find different ways for it to resonate. So certainly a lot of it is on them. And look, I know, guys, this is where a lot of you I'm going to lose some of you. I know a lot of you scoff at the aw shucks personality of Gunnar Stockton. If you watched the interview earlier this week, guys, I mean, you can't help but just smile at it. How many times say, well, heck, I don't know. Like, when I know some scoff at that personality, like that matters. But the thing about that all shucks personality with Gunnar Stockton, it's authentic, man. That is who that kid is, all right? And people respect that. People respect authenticity, especially when you're a good dude, being your authentic self. And so I think, and I might lose some of you here, that's fine, but I truly do believe this. I believe that it helps to have a quarterback on a team that is a unifying force rather than a divisive force the way that we had last year. A guy that the team can rally behind. You saw how the team celebrated after we won the SEC championship game. Yeah, they were pumped we won the game. It almost seemed they were more happy for Gunnar than they were for the team that they won the title, right? So it's a guy the team can rally behind. A guy that has a humility and a hunger about him, which certainly contrasts with the guy we had at quarterback a year ago, who I do think was hungry in 2023, but maybe not as much last year. A guy who is let's just say it, man, he's the antithesis of entitled. Like, that is the exact opposite of what Gunnar Stockton is. He's a guy who teammates respect. You have a guy at quarterback now who's a gritty, hardworking, blue-collar, team-oriented quarterback. That is the guy that you're going to have setting the tone for Georgia this year, not Mr. Hollywood Carson back from a year ago. I do believe that matters because that is going to help get Georgia back to its roots of eating off the floor, right? Of being hungry, of putting in the extra work, of going the extra mile on the field, off the field, all those things, of respecting your teammates, of playing for each other. And again, you can scoff at the all shucks personality all you want. You can say, that's ridiculous, dude. It doesn't matter. You can say that. That's fine. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But Gunnar Stockton gives you all that. He gives you all of that. And I truly do believe that matters. No, in isolation, having a quarterback that's a good dude, who's a good leader, who leads by example, who does all the little things, who works hard, who's blue collar, who respects his teammates, who treats them well, that in and of itself is not enough to win at a high level. It's not. You still have to have talent. But like I said at the beginning of the show, guys, I've seen enough now where I believe more in Gunnar from a football standpoint than I ever have. I've had my doubts. I have had my doubts. But I've seen enough over the past 3-4 months to lead me to believe that this guy has the talent, and you combine that with the guy he is and the tone he sets at the quarterback position, the type of leader that he is, and that's why I think that, yes, Gunnar Stockton is the right quarterback for Georgia football in 2025. But all right, guys, again, I appreciate every one of you guys taking time to listen to this episode. Certainly, if you made it this far, I know a lot of you are probably not going to fully agree with me, and that's okay. So I'd love to hear from you guys. And if you do agree with me, I would love to hear from you too. So I know I'm probably going to get flamed away here, so it would be great to have some people that have my back too. So I'd love to hear from all of you guys, whatever your opinion is. So leave the comments, like, subscribe, check out the Glory UJ podcast. I'm going to have another episode later this week where we're doing a mailbag from our listeners, which we do a lot, talking about some of the things that went on at the Coaches Clinic. So make sure to check that out, guys. But yeah, appreciate you guys. And I'm Tyler. As always, go Dogs!
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.